This is Corvin Turim speaking. And there's more life in the frozen wastes. In this case, its structures populated by a few dozen from Oxford and Cambridge. What their purpose was? Well, I will go into that. They've been chosen to safeguard a priceless treasure. The seeds and the seedlings of plants from all over the world. They've been deposited in seedling arks to stop them from freezing. But it fell to them to build a city to protect these precious buildings until the winter ended, however long that might be. The only way to do this was with automatons. They would ensure that the green earth was reborn, even if the human population wasn't there to witness it. There was, however, an initial problem. The plans for the factory were lost on the way to this site and needed to be recovered. And to do that, a beacon would need to be built. Thankfully, plans for that could be researched. Although before that, workshops needed to be built. Well, at least one anyway. And resources would need to be gathered, especially coal, for the automaton already in that city, however small it might be. And automatons would be necessary, as there were very few humans living there. All engineers. Engineers that would need shelter, medical facilities, and also food. Food would be enough for the next few days, but more would be needed. As for the Arks, they would need additional heating. For although the coals would not reach the city for some time, based on the records we have, it would not get any better, not for a while. Yes. And already a law was made for those few there, and it seems that it was deemed necessary for an emergency shift. For some strange reason. Well, strange to me anyway. There were no labourers, as in those without any specific training in engineering and medicine. So they did not have hunters' huts. So researching hothouses would become necessary for the continued survival of the people of this city around the Arks. And then there's the thought about heating. It would be needed to expand workplaces. Not to mention build where needed. It was at this point then... sorry. That ways of faster gathering were researching. Which would go faster with 2 workshops. At this point, the people from Oxford and Cambridge were considering, what are they going to eat? That was a good question, and one they answered by building a cookhouse. Quite close to one of their arks, and where they work. Well, those around the workshops, anyway. How convenient, isn't it? Yes, the seedling Arks. They need to be kept at, well, needed to be kept at a specific temperature. Any lower and their contents would die. Which would mean that the mission of the people who came here, or rather came there, would end in miserable failure. And that wasn't something that the people from those universities could tolerate. As for the gathering post near the wood and coal, that isn't something... well, wasn't something. Need to get these terms right. Well, anyway, the research for the beacon followed faster gathering. Housing was certainly going to be needed quite soon. much sooner than they thought, as housing was necessary. Enough for 45 engineers. As for the automaton, that required the generator to be activated. So it was. It was only capable of, well, the lowest setting, but that would be enough, at least at this point. As for the automaton, that could work throughout the night. They don't eat. Well, not as we would. They don't sleep. And they don't have discontent. Some of the engineers of this city had housing, although not all. That would require more wood. It was pretty basic in our city as well. At least until something better was researched. And on the horizon, increased cold was coming. And so, an infrastructure was needed. As for the automaton on this night, it was sent to the cookhouse. People needed to eat. Especially those that were lacking housing. It's not a good idea to be left without a roof over your head. Even if it was canvas or a similar material. Although, the next priority for the people of the city around the seedling Arks, was a medical facility. As the first of the sick were emerging. And the next law signed was an extended shift. That did not go down well at all. Especially as it was set to an extended shift around the workplaces. Well, except the workshops. Perhaps the one in charge of this seedling Ark City wanted to alternate between workplaces and workshops. Well, it's something to think about, isn't it? As this is more than a city of plant lovers. Although, can we really call this a city? Then again, can we call where we live a city? The plan was to have all the raw meats cooked and turned into rations. And once there wasn't any more raw food, meat or otherwise, have the automaton gather materials. The sooner the factory was researched, the better. Because that would mean more automatons could be built. As for steam cores, they would need to be found in the wastes. Basic infrastructure was established, which would suffice short term, but long term, as we know, more would be needed. Even though there was a much smaller population. On the second day, the medical facilities were a priority. After that, the focus would be largely on building the rest of the housing. As it was suspected that the lack of housing was the reason for people getting sick. Well, it was best not to take chances, wasn't it? Some engineers were diverted to not just build the medical post, but also to man it. After that, heaters were researched. Soon, the seedling Arks would have need of them. In order to keep them warm. As for the housing dilemma, that would need to be dealt with on day 2. As for the beacon, the decision regarding that would be where to put it. And that decision was as far away from resources as possible. Yes. It was determined that as soon as the heating options were fully researched, the priority would be, well, making it so that a source of food was researched. Because the food would run out by day 4. So time was not on their side. Was it ever on our side? Out here? The heaters were researched. After that were steam hubs. Well, they would need to be researched eventually. And besides, opening up a higher tier of technology would require more wood than there was currently. Or rather, could be spared. Although they could be thankful for small mercies.
Night is coming. Put down.
As the housing situation by this point would soon be solved. That and the beacon was built. Although there was one slight problem. It required engineers and wood. That and the storm was on the horizon. Thankfully, it wouldn't be something to worry about for a while yet. A law was to be signed. As for which law, it was sustain life. this leader had similar, although not identical, ideals to mine. Then again, the priority of this city was, well, adapting to the environment rather than any purpose. Largely because the purpose was clear. Preserve the plants in the Arks. And don't let them freeze. Sounds simple enough, although, as some of you might be aware of by now, it is rarely that simple. Although the solution to the housing situation, that was simple. And was dealt with before the next work shift. As for steel, considering the lack of piles of piles of that, a steelworks would become necessary for continued expansion. And thankfully there was a source of it, or rather the raw materials for steel, close by. Along with coal, for when a coal mine we needed. A coal mine because there was far too few engineers for for a coal thumper to be viable. And it would be necessary to improve gathering methods to make sure there was enough coal to go around. The places that needed heating, as well as, well, fueling the automatons, as there would need to be more than one to keep things running within the seedling Arks city. Yes, a gathering post was built near some piles of wood, so that they might be gathered more efficiently. It would also be a good thing for the nearby seedling Ark. Because it would need a steam hub at some point. and it was decided that around now would be a good a time as any to have one built. Considering that there were trees nearby, and the wood piles wouldn't last forever. Well, they would last less than, well, the piles of wood. Sorry, no. The piles of wood would last less than the trees. Sorry. I was just thinking of Winterhome.
Work time. Get moving.
The people of the seedling Arks city were housed, and their sicknesses treated. But there was still a problem with food. That would need to be dealt with sooner than the approaching storm.